Okay, first, an introduction. In the previous video, we discussed the absolute necessity of having geographic-based, real-world communities composed of members that casually hang out with one another and or formally run traditional societal institutions like churches and clubs. We also talked about how television and the internet has led to a decline in active community members, may they be active in formal and or informal gathering activities, and an increase in passive community members, with immediate families and atomized individuals choosing to just do their own thing and not bother anybody, but also not do anything at all.
Hey!
The biggest one, touch that one right there. That.
Oh.
Lincoln, please, man. I'm trying to sleep, please.
So in this video, we will begin by discussing how technological progress is the root cause behind the collaborative community and how the technological solution to the current crisis of loneliness, niche-based subculture specifically, has not fulfilled the basic belongingness needs of people living in the modern world. Before getting into the meat and potatoes of this section, when I refer to technology, I'm not simply referring to machines, gadgets, and gizmos, but also the methods of doing things, techniques, which though the term technique is often used as a synonym for an artistic craft and or a systematic science, the term is much more all-encompassing. Technique refers to the mechanistic force that intends to terminate the spontaneity of any field of human activity by imposing a concrete mode of operation to maximize the efficiency and reliability or predictability of a given process to satisfy and homogenize an exponentially growing consumer base, which is a force that many can see on a macroscopic scale through the safetyist agenda promoted by our elite institutions. But it has explicitly impacted many everyday things, such as the act of food preparation. I mean, the act of gathering and cooking food has been transformed into an assembly line process back in the factories where the fast food is manufactured. And then this frozen, sugary, preservative-filled, formaldehyde-filled slop that's pushed out of these factories, it then goes to the actual fast food establishments where it's served to the clientele. It's heated up by the team members on the production line. This phenomenon of standardization is occurring across professions, with the managers of these companies no longer placing their capital behind the skills that are actually harbored within their employees themselves, but instead managers want an optimized step-by-step procedure, like an instruction manual or a sort of a means for project managers to base their training of employees. So a procedure that outlines the best practices for the often unskilled laborers working in the industry, along with the machines that can now, with this step-by-step procedure written down, these machines can now automate a lot of these tasks, and just generally they can do these tasks often better than the laborers, since it's just a very mechanistic process now. Laborers, they're much more difficult to maintain than machines. You just need oil or whatever kind of other things you need with it. Some kind of a technician to help out occasionally, run maintenance checks and all that. While laborers, they've got all their needs and other emotional human baggage that, it's just more difficult to deal with. Like giving them money, no. So now that we have a better understanding of what technology and technique are, as mentioned in the previous video, the rapid adoption of the internet and television by the American populace has undoubtedly
had an effect
on our society. But these are only the most recent trends of a multiple millennium process. The current rate of technological progress is obviously unique to the modern world. But what is much less well known by us modern people is that this progressively more extreme augmentation of society at the whims of the brute force of uncontrollable technical activity was consciously avoided by traditional societies, maybe ancient Greece and Rome, or pretty much any non-Western society that preceded the Meiji Restoration of Japan. Even across many of these highly advanced civilizational cultures, they understood that unleashing productive forces instead of prioritizing moderation and a more contemplative life would inevitably lead to the disharmonization of their societies, and more specifically, the breakdown of their societies as a biot. As man has become more free from natural forces, man has become more subjugated to new necessities created, not even by the conscious consent of man, but by autonomous artificial forces, as technological progress will always escape the control of any individual technician. A fact that has been demonstrated time and time again may have been with the invention of the warehouse store by sole price, which would lead Walmart to dominate retail despite Price's regrets. I don't know how serious this line is, but it's just funny, honestly. I couldn't think of any other examples off the top of my head. Or the most obvious example, if you saw Oppenheimer this summer, the race for the atomic bomb. Technique escapes the intentionality of any individual technician as it becomes a fully self-propelling force that latches itself onto any of the unlimited wants of man, and thereby lacks any of the organic limits present in natural environmental systems. Any ecosystem will become vulnerable to collapse at a certain threshold of disturbances in its food chains, while technology can replicate and augment itself through its exploitation of humanity's artificial needs, created by its earlier versions, for the entire lifetime of the species that has become more and more reliant on them. These new needs, created by technological progress, are the root of large socioeconomic inequalities, as distinguished from natural physical inequalities. As while the standardization of work might allow people of all skill sets to work in various industrial sectors, which has helped equalize the socioeconomic statuses of the working classes of society, the expansion of power to corporate and governmental managers has only further concentrated power. The first instance of socioeconomic disparities becoming more extreme than physical inequalities was the transition of humanity from nomadic hunter-gatherer societies into sedentary agricultural societies. Which, of course, I know this is going very far back, but give me a second. This event would lead to the original instance of primitive accumulation, which is like a Marxist Austrian economics term, in which a particular segment of society acquired a substantially higher share of capital. Or in these times, it would just be land and natural resources, much more so than any other stratas of that given tribe. During these times, technologically based disparities were due to different farming techniques, such as distinct selective breeding and crop rotation methods employed by the now discretely divided segments of the now rigidly hierarchical tribe. This point in a civilization's coming into being is the root of the most malignant force for any cohesive society: envy. This cardinal sin always precedes wrath, and thereby acts as a driving force behind most conflict, may it be Marxian class conflict, or a struggle between the vast populace and a minuscule elite, or just classical raping and pillaging of other tribes. So, well before technique was mechanized into the kinds of machine technologies that we most commonly picture technology as today, which far surpasses the complexity of primitive tools like hoes and spears, societies were violently tearing themselves apart by allowing unfettered technological progress. But in the modern day, after all of these conflicts between the perennial caste, between the Brahmins and down to the Dalits that once organized traditional societies, since they have concluded, the old castes seem to have disappeared. However, the division between the common people and a minuscule elite have grown to become more extreme now than in any other society across human history. While this elite has become more detached from the common people and more globalized, at the same time, violent conflicts have ceased as even the people have become more reliant on the technological system and less interdependent on their own communities. So they just don't really see these enemies. You don't see Bill Gates in public. You don't see all these people in public.
Don't knife me on the streets when I'm walking around Washington, D.C., because that's where you can find me.
On some sub-rational, intuitive level, we all understand that across every aspect of life, that moderation is vitally necessary. Even when it comes to our use of screens, which despite half of our waking lives being consumed by social media and other internet applications, we can comprehend on an individual level that these habits or soft addictions are far from healthy, with some of the most popular content on video sharing websites, somewhat ironically, becoming self-improvement content.
How Lick Smaxing saved my life.
May they be promoting dopamine detoxes or some other form of fasting from screens. As our society has become idiosyncratically individualistic, it is absolutely integral that personal responsibility and an internal locus of control are getting promoted through the media, which is the entity that has partially replaced in-person connections to a large degree. However, while modern tools of mass communication can allow the transfusion of messages, such as those that align themselves with the kind of pop stoicism that even PewDiePie really professes, which has promoted a healthier way of thinking and acting for many, our wicked problems require collective action. Our improved methods of mass production and the further consolidation of people into smaller areas that are built around rapid distribution networks has allowed technological progress to not only outpace the natural, more gradual changes in our culture, along with our socio-familial and political structures, but technique has been able to assimilate all of us into its complex apparatuses, which holistically incentivizes ceaseless production and consumption to satisfy our exponentially growing desires. Might we accept further technological progress to remedy our anxieties of existential threats through the invention of military technologies and anti-aging medical technologies, or to help stave off our feelings of gratuitous tedium and loneliness through entertainment and communications technologies that not only stimulate our visual and auditory senses, but our tactile senses through the invention of virtual reality technologies? We have, in fact, become bound to the will of technique. The most apparent problem with these tools and techniques that are getting utilized by modern man is that they are evolving at a pace that is not conducive for cross-generational interaction. This phenomenon might seem like a non-issue, but as a society, instead of continuing to allow families and communities to pass down knowledge internally and to self-regulate technological progress, like in traditional societies, we're permitting a select hired class of professionals to take over the duties of educating and even communicating to younger generations by allowing the newest waves of machines and mediums entering the mass market to disregard the abilities of capable local leaders in favor of experts and celebrities from anywhere but where you live.
We have just doxed the current location of Osama bin Laden.
Oh my God!
Osama bin Laden is still alive, and we know where he is.
Never have the lines between age-based groups been so discrete. This current digital divide goes beyond the inability of older generations to understand younger generations, or even Generation Z to understand the youngest generations. The internet has not only created further divisions between these demographics based on the variable time, but the internet has failed in one of its initial goals, which was to democratize access to quality information more evenly across society. While of course it has done that to a great degree, the positive consequences of the information revolution have been much more marginal and less equitable than expected, even after the vast majority of households in the global north have now acquired access to high-speed internet. During the early internet, or Web 1.0, there was an atmosphere of optimism that was continually being resubstantiated by the internet's rapid advancement and the growth in its access and market share. This initially began with Timothy Berners-Lee, the inventor of the World Wide Web, who chose that his software needed to be free and accessible to everyone back in the year 1993. Thanks to this genuinely admirable decision made by Timothy Berners-Lee, the further development and proliferation of internet technologies became a decentralized movement, which stimulated a new sector of the economy and also caused a surge in libertarian ideals across a newly emerging elite. Therefore, the groundwork had been laid for such positive movements as the free culture and open content movements, which have most popularly succeeded in their lofty goals of democratizing media and technology through Creative Commons licenses, which protect social media content and other creative works from copyright laws, and open source licenses, which permits access to free software. The techno-optimism characteristic of Silicon Valley startups, venture capitalists, and public figures during the 1990s, all those people combined, orientated this burgeoning technological elite towards various idealistic goals that go beyond the barriers of the media and software getting uploaded to computers themselves, such as the maximization of users and programmers' freedom of expression, primarily through unregulated access to an infinite stream of often obscure and even obscene entertainment and information, along with the ability to communicate transgressive viewpoints on early internet forums, which are free from the hate speech laws and other restrictive guidelines of governments and corporations, as well as the social norms and anxieties of the traditional in-person public squares, which the tech nerds that were first getting onto these websites very much appreciated. Related to these real-world goals surrounding the communication faculty of the internet, the techno-optimist also wanted to remedy such relevant wicked problems as the then what was becoming more notable and more observable collapse of communities, but most preferably by using social networking platforms to host a diverse array of online mediated subcultures, usually across borders. Unfortunately, this dream would not pan out as intended by the 1990s cyber counterculture, with the techno-optimism of Silicon Valley having mostly died out. In the wake of the burst of the dot-com bubble at the turn of the millennium, the endless forward movement of the information revolution had been stopped, as many companies either shut down or were acquired, with such corporations as Amazon losing 90% of its market share within these 2 years. This crash allowed skepticism to seep into Silicon Valley firms as the parameters of their techno-futurist revolution were finally realized, which caused a shift in the outlook of the then burgeoning big tech firms from wanting to fix the many wicked problems of our times to internalizing more cynical, profit-oriented desires, primarily to ensure that one's firm would survive another market crash unscathed, with these firms shifting their missions from creating innovative solutions to the world's problems by using their own technologies towards merely using the profits of their products for philanthropic causes, which is the more safe, conventional means of influencing the world adopted by most of the mega rich, beginning with the robber barons of the late 1900s. The rampant profit-oriented cynicism of modern-day big tech giants can be reflected in the leading programmers behind the biggest social media platforms, most popularly Facebook, admitting to intentionally making these applications addictive. Furthermore, the fact that these firms have abandoned one of their initial goals of facilitating an open marketplace of ideas, as demonstrated by their repeated surrenders to the whims of advertisers, rather than at least attempting to confront these politically biased firms to find a compromise, which this isn't related to the issue of today exactly, but it makes it clear how far the revised Californian ideology has deviated from its initial libertarian conception. The final insult against longtime users of these websites is that, while at the same time suppressing dissenting opinions and transgressive content, which, might have even been seen as some way to make a larger population of people comfortable to communicate with one another online, this is not what has happened. Nowadays, the most lowbrow yet marketable content is getting promoted by these websites' algorithms, which expands the reach of content based on the simple metric of the high level of interactivity. This condition means that no deference is given to more informational or creative content over entertaining and or safe, often AI-generated content, which means that the former kind of content gets terminated and shadow banned far more often than the latter, which often borders on spam and can occasionally contain malicious stuff like, the whole ElsaGate fiasco a few years ago, and related kind of content that is actually still popping out and you will probably find on YouTube to this day. Despite its explicit capacity to cause harm, these videos are the type of content that gets shown on the front pages of apps to millions of users, as more informational content is far more heavily monitored than pure entertainment. The attentional shift in social media platforms towards entertainment media sharing
Applications.
in favor of online social networking tools has squandered the old hopes among Silicon Valley firms to repair the collapse of our communities. May have been through facilitating the conditions to maintain existing bonds from the real world and are creating strong bonds based on cyberspace with people thousands of miles away. Due to major economic restructurings in the global north that have overinflated the value of information technologies over even the energy sources used to run our power grids and the internet itself, big tech firms have increased their dependence on data as its value has overtaken that of oil, which has added a caustic profit incentive to a medium that is intended to be used for communication purposes. Therefore, the internet has become to our civil society what the cotton gin had become for the institution of slavery in America. While communication and cotton refinement were made more efficient by both inventions, the internet, first of all, has made people participate less in social gatherings and have forced people into a greater reliance on weaker, fluid bonds partially based online, or just simply none at all, thereby furthering the decline of civil society in a similarly dramatic manner as a cotton gin increased labor force required for cotton harvesting, thereby causing the last major surge in the population of slaves in American history. I'm not trying to call, modern internet users or something the new slave, but it just happened to be the best comparison I can pull out of my head as someone that knows American history. So nowadays, the only remnants of techno-optimism among the tech elite can be found in the Thiel Foundation and the whole hype around Web 3.0, a prophesied next version of the internet that intends to return internet users back to a decentralized cyberspace. So, The only people that are genuinely optimistic about the future impacts of the internet on the masses are crypto bros with seasteads off the coast of a Caribbean tax haven. The reason behind the failure of the internet to help to stabilize the collapse of our communities is that the software infrastructure of the internet was put into place in a way that incentivized social capital to increase among a more atomized populace through hosting niche-based subcultures on its servers, rather than through directly repairing geographic-based communities via online-mediated communication, which is because the primary goal of the internet was to connect the globe rather than local communities, which started with IT nerds from around the world with niche, dorky interests meeting on forums, rather than community members and leaders like parish priests and exalted rulers of lodges organizing meetups in real life. So, most relationships that are completely based online are organized in hulking masses of often niche-based interest groups composed of fluid non-members, which only join these subcultures to pursue their own pleasures, which might be similar to the reasons behind schmoozers attending and even organizing informal activities, but without the lasting bonds that build reciprocity between others. The fluidity of these relationships goes beyond the often fleeting nature of these subcultures, which are often based around ever-morphing personal tastes concerning mass culture, products, and influencers, such as the fandoms that rapidly subsume one another, like the communities of hype that surrounded creepypastas, then FNAF, then SCP, then Bindi, Poppy, Baldies, whatever, then liminal backrooms, analog horror, and now FNAF again. But yeah, back to the point. One obvious limitation to building strong bonds online is that despite modern technology giving people the historically idiosyncratic opportunity to have long, face-to-face communication, irrespective of where you are on the planet, most of these supra-geographical relationships are often reducible to drive-by acquaintances built on servers and online games and other online gathering spaces. But most importantly, the means of communication between social media users is mostly relegated to text, photos, GIFs, and links, since at least outside of Facebook, LinkedIn, and applications with a high percentage of women, most social media platforms are primarily comprised of anons rather than what some people refer to as face cells. Face cells being the people that have actually revealed their face and often go by their actual legal christened name on every account, rather than some alias like Operation Mad Dog and a nickname like Jimbo. The impact of anonymity on building social bonds is substantial. One of the most representative groups of these anonymous masses is the anime racist.
Why can't you just fucking explain it? Why do you have a fucking anime girl as your profile picture?
Because I watched the show when I was 15.
I don't care if you watched it. It could have been any other character. Why did you choose the little girl? And you're a fucking grown man.
Anime racists are a surprisingly common crop of internet users that are very active across social media websites, but at the same time exhibit obvious antisocial behaviors, such as spewing their intentionally controversial political, religious, and sex views across comment sections and timelines, which might occasionally be serious, but are almost always purposely over-exaggerated or some advanced form of irony. In all actuality, the average person promoting another Crusader Inquisition probably supports gay marriage and only minor reductions in immigration if you pestered them outside of Twitter about the subject. The most obvious characteristic of this group, and others like it, is their either ironic or sincere choice to represent themselves with avatars that just exude femininity, immaturity, deviancy, and more directly, it gives people the impression that this guy does not care much for the, normal straight guy interests of sports, guns, cars, and women with big ass and big tits. This person likely has a preference in things that do not merely deviate from norms, but are things that only a really confident degenerate can talk about to an ordinary person that they know in real life. This phenomenon of terminally online, antisocial social media users that are known for doing a little bit of trolling,
It's called we do a little trolling.
reflects the lack of decorum and basic mutual respect between social media users, as while the lowest passions and desires are necessarily tempered in most face-to-face real-life interactions, in a complete non-space, that could never facilitate the same compelling sense of shared ownership as in, physical spaces in real life. A place where anonymity shields people from any actual consequences for their actions. There is not even enough basic trust between people to ensure that one is talking to a human who claims to be who they are, rather than a dog, a bot, or a PETA.
Like Zoink Scoop, let's get out of here!
Online relationships might be much weaker and more fluid than the bonds between members of real-world communities, but it is not unique in its low capacity for creating strong bonds. Beginning before the inception of Web 1.0, the only exceptional trends in American society that were going against the total decimation of social capital were the growing amounts of social bonds that were being formed through self-help support groups, volunteer organizations with high levels of youth participation, which have grown mostly due to credit incentives given by schools, staff-led interest groups, which have replaced grassroots groups like the Grange or the Black Panthers, and gym memberships / subscriptions. It's not really a membership, you're just subscribing to a service. Let us be honest. There is a very obvious difference between the use of institutions like Alcoholics Anonymous, APAC, the Israel interest group in Washington, and Planet Fitness. These organizations, they relate to our communities in a very different manner than churches and more traditional civic organizations like the Knights of Columbus, the Boy Scouts, the Red Cross, and the dozens of fraternal organizations like the Benevolent and Protective Order of the Elks, the Rotary Club, the American Legion, etc. Also, so far I've only mentioned secular institutions, which do not even compete with religious institutions, especially Christian churches, which, according to Robert Putnam, is the most substantial source of America's social capital. Most importantly, since churchgoers donate, volunteer, and actively take part in the activities of even secular organizations more often than people that only attend their respective temples on holidays or are simply unaffiliated. Now, the main difference between the former growing institutions with the latter declining civic organizations is that the social ties formed at AA and Planet Fitness were only formed secondarily or even honestly accidentally to the primary objective of fulfilling one's own happiness and health goals, which is similar to the bonds formed online from shared interest in the same video game or some highly specialized hobby like basket weaving. On the other hand, one of the most influential civic organizations of the 20th century, the Elks, was explicitly formed for collective causes. The founding members of the Elks, the Jolly Corks acting group, established the first lodges to form a social safety net for fellow actors that might be struggling to find work. It must be emphasized, I'm not looking down on people that attend AA meetings instead of events at the Elks. I'm just pointing out the intended purposes behind these organizations objectively differ in their roles. The Elks is objectively more community-orientated than AA. Wait 1 second. Hold your horses past Jim. I've got to interject real quick. Okay, Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, whatever other related groups exist, they all come from the same Alcoholics Anonymous. These groups are, in fact, they are internally interested within the meetings themselves. They do not fulfill the same civic community roles as other institutions. But at the same time, these are very quality groups that's very collectivistic, where people in there rely on one another and can create very strong bonds. Not only that, but the 12 steps and the 12 traditions and just the general structure of the meetings, it's very ritualistic and even pretty inspired by a Christian church service mass. But it's unfortunate that these institutions have become so common while the institutions that were supposed to build these connections have begun to die out. So that's all I want to say. Get back to the video. The truth is that a lot of the seemingly positive trends in social capital creation that have occurred over the past few decades were catalyzed from more extreme needs for social connections due to declines in the social structures of the extended family and the tight-knit community. Traditional institutions that exist for the sole reason of remedying our socioeconomic and psychological issues have become necessary, as not only has a power vacuum been left by civic institutions, but more social problems have been created by its absence, which has made national and international NGOs take up our civic responsibilities and the demand for therapy from substance abuse and other mental disorders to skyrocket. It is not the common luxury, consumerist, narcissistic, Kardashian strawman of the cardinal sin of vainglory that is tearing America and many foreign societies apart. What is tearing our countries apart is the orientation of our technological societies around centralized organizations formed by masses of individual clients and ran by administrational experts instead of local organizations based in actual communities and ran by the members of these communities. The hijacking of basic social responsibilities from local institutions by outside NGOs and for-profit corporations has similarly occurred in the niche-based subcultures that primarily exist in cyberspace. This seemingly benign form of factionalization has become necessary for citizens to continue their informal activities, as certain trends in urbanization have hollowed out communities from self-contained cities that people could live, work, learn, worship, and play, to places that are functionally only active by the majority adult populations at night, and the primary role is just where commuters sleep at night and where kids stay in school during the day. And undoubtedly, the most influential book in urban theory and a majorly important work in urban design and city planning, The Death and Life of Great American Cities, Jane Jacobs critiqued modernist planning, which she referred to as Radiant Garden City Beautiful, an amalgamation of three major planning movements from the late 19th and early 20th centuries, critiquing these movements for empowering insulated bureaucratic experts to develop and redevelop cities block by block to fulfill the prerogative of formalizing cities, thereby intending to decrease crime and disease by reducing congestion, mostly present in informal settlements, or what most people refer to as slums, tenement houses, along with making cities more aesthetically pleasing, at least from the bird's eye view, rather than on the ground level. The implications of planning cities from such a disembodied vantage point is that instead of formalized cities being built on a human scale meant for human habitation, like the much more organically built towns of old that did not even need to be regulated by nuisance-based land use controls, the urban spaces that most Americans live in have now become unwalkable and, to put it simply, just artificial. In both urban America and most modernized cities around the world, the mass production of cookie-cutter skyscrapers and suburbs across major metro statistical areas has prematurely minimized the longevity of communities, as neither high-rise apartment buildings nor sprawling McMansions on ranch-sized lots provide the suitable conditions for socialization between neighbors, with no commercial, institutional, or recreational spaces being provided within a 15-minute walk in most of these monumental complexes and subdivisions, which are, on average, the size of the map in Fortnite. The absence of a heart to one city, a place where people can do more than just drive and shop at big box stores, destroys one's perception of their place being unique and worthy of multi-generational habitation, or just straight up destruction. Nowadays, most families are choosing to leave such bedroom communities within a generation. Even with the access to better education and the safety of the neighborhood, not much is making people want to stay in these neighborhoods across generations. After the utility of a good schooling is exhausted, once the kids graduate from high school, why should a family stay in a higher density suburb where nobody's hanging out in front yards, front porches, or even backyards? Which is the actual reason behind suburbs being so safe. Because nobody goes outside. Under these circumstances, why shouldn't a family move out to a bigger house on a bigger lot down in the Sunbelt? I mean, their kids who are entering college and the workforce will also be probably moving across the four corners of the country anyway. So if nothing made the place a place in the first place, why not move into a house that is bigger and better, that you can now afford after breaking your back for the middle 15 years of your life while you were supporting your family? All kinds of sprawl and rapid urbanization, may it be suburban or urban, drain places of their essence. In the popular song Gangnam Style, yes, you heard me, the theme of this song is actually really deep. I am not kidding. Gangnam Style critiques the non-place of the Gangnam-gu in Seoul, which was a rural backwater just a few decades ago. But now, the district has become the new commercial and cultural center of South Korea, with the K-pop star Psy lampooning the obvious emptiness of the place's non-culture by creating a stupid, replicable dance with a purposely inane chorus about But most thought-provoking about Gangnam Style's lyrics is that the song begins in the first verse by debasing the culture of what is the Beverly Hills of the Far East as an excessively materialistic one that have screwed up their priorities so royally that Gangnamers judge the attractiveness of a woman by her ability to comfortably afford an overpriced cup of coffee from some hip fad cafe. This line might seem like a simple joke line with no deeper meaning than, haha, you Starbucks drinking normies all want to be a Kardashian so bad. How about you become a productive member of society, you friggin' dumbasses? But actually, this first verse alludes to the fact that these cafes have actually had a very substantial impact on the culture of Seoul, especially in Gangnam, where they can be found on every corner of the district. Most people living in Gangnam reside in SROs, single room occupancies, without any aspirations for child rearing, due to the price of everything being
Too damn high.
so as mere consumerism have come to overtake the traditional collective identities formed around such belief systems and ways of life as Confucianism, the once integral and formal gathering activity of family meals has been abandoned in favor of sharing on social media to acquaintances and complete strangers, post-cataloging one's experiences at some trendy new cafe, with these cafes at best serving as meeting places for friends in the same way for couples at love motels. None of these places, like love motels, they don't serve the interests of facilitating a highly interconnected community across generations. They're pretty much just profit motivated, mostly love motels. Like, I get that there's an artistry to the interior design of a cafe or like the quality of the food that's actually being made, but functionally it's much more based on transactional bonds and lacking the necessary bonds created through families. The Gangnam district of Seoul is one of the most highly modernized places on earth, but socially, it seems more impoverished than the farming villages that the urban district took over. Gangnamers, I don't know if that's a real demonym, I'm just using Gangnamers. Gangnamers have been comfortably atomized as some of the most luxurious, marketable pleasures on earth have become plentiful in the district, with an artisan cooked bulgogi and this. I mean, it looks good, but I really don't know what this is, honestly. I'm a corn-fed middle American boy, yeah, that. These hip cafe foods have taken over the food and conversation of a family meal, and at love motels.
A good buck.
With a professional sex worker that is Gangnam beautiful, in quotes, which just means artificially beautiful due to plastic surgery. This has taken over the truly erotic experience of a
good buck,
shared with a significant other that most people might consider, mid or a 6, but that to be beautiful for a reason that nobody else quite understands.
Alan loved me. He thought I was beautiful.
Therefore, in South Korea, the genuine bonds of filial and erotic love have been colonized by consumerism in its purest form. So no wonder why this country has, unfortunately, one of the highest suicide rates on earth. The heart of the civilization's modern culture is a community as vain as the wannabe celebrities of Los Angeles, and an urban district that is indistinguishable from the dozens of other East Asian metropolises that are also trying to mimic Singapore's skyline. The death of places that citizens can feel connected to in any substantial way converges with the popular sentiment surrounding individualism, which have been running rampant in even more recently collectivist societies in the global north, like those in South Korea. The specific form of individualism that I'm talking about, and which has become so common across more modernized societies, this comes from a negative liberty perspective of freedom and achieving eudaimonia, or the good life. This view of freedom posits that man is maximally free when he is least influenced by external forces and most in control of one's thoughts and actions. And since the Age of Enlightenment, primarily the philosophical movements that sprang out of Britain in the 17th century, this ideal primarily related to one's private rights to control their land, which has de-emphasized shared responsibilities to one's neighborhood and community by incentivizing people to put more of their stock into their own private spaces. Though, since most people nowadays are not landowners, this ideal has been transposed into one's own personal achievements and individuated identity instead of, the land that one owns. Therefore, since geographic-based communities, which are more in tune with the mainstream mass culture than atomized individuals or niche interest-based subcultures, since the former communities are no longer valuable to the mostly landless younger generations, a huge chunk of society that does not only include social outcasts like in the yesteryears, have begun to pursue social bonds with people outside their geographic and demographic boundaries in favor of smaller groups of people that share the same interests, passions, and occasionally hobbies and careers. Many of these divergent interests fostered within highly technologically advanced societies often clash with the founding religions and less often the newer secular bourgeois cultural apparatuses that are primarily known for controlling the media. This conflict can be reflected in the bent among niche-based subcultures to center themselves around interests that deviate from norms. May they be more intellectual, such as groups that organize themselves around heterodox philosophies and politics and hyper-specialized hard sciences. Or may they be more deviant from a moral sense, which, this might be deviant in a good way, such as those promoting free software. Deviant in an at least seemingly neutral way, such as those centering their activities around, otaku, furry, WoW, lol, etc. Those kind of entertainment modes of escapism.
This is why I'm always on the computer, to escape my life. It's really that simple.
Or deviant, because they be liking to do the bad thing. Such as communities that enjoy producing and distributing CP, which CP is an acronym that I'll just say does not stand for cheese pizza, like John Podesta might have thought while he was emailing Hillary Clinton. I mean, like, now some people think that these simple pizza fans are into doing a bad thing with, Roblox players. I mean, come on, what a massive blunder. But a harmless minor lapse in reason. I mean, understandable. What I was talking about was communities online that make and share child. But yeah. Since nations and even cities have become nothing more than arbitrary lines on a map to people with a high-speed internet connection who can play Gary's Mod with players from Eastern Europe, in the same hour that they can argue about abortion and marijuana laws and ethics with Twitter users from Uruguay, South Africa, Malaysia, wherever. Yeah, the bonds that keep people entangled within the milieu of a once vibrant mass culture, with all of its local civic affairs and other public events, they have ruptured. Given that it is infeasible for one person to split their time commitments between both communal and more personalized passion projects, more and more people in our hyper-modern societies are choosing small communities centered around their shared personal tastes and consumer preferences, or rather than something seemingly disconnected from their immediate sense-perceptive experiences. May that be God, nature, and, well, of course, community. In more than a century after the closing of the American frontier, and after half a century of rent costs increasing as wages have stagnated, the only means for malnourished, childless rentoids to make a name for themselves and carve out their own niche out of the wilderness of the modern world is to become a part of a smaller and more specialized group of people that best fits one's particular interest. According to the Dunbar number, humans have a cognitive limit on the amount of people that one is able to genuinely, platonically love, around 5, meaningfully bond with, around 150, and simply recognize in public, around 1,500 people. So if an atomized individual is going to have any lasting impact on the world, he must join a small group of a couple thousand people that share at least one important common interest, which is a much better fit for creating meaningful relationships than striving towards becoming a part of the mass culture of something more abstract at this point, like one city, which used to be a good idea for doing that. But now the numbers of 1 million and upwards to, I think the largest metro area is it's definitely over 50 million people. This far exceeds the limit of 1,500 recognizable names and faces. As best put by Gwern Branwen in his essay, The Melancholy of Subculture Society. Yes, I stole the name. Okay, whatever. It is infinitely easier to be a big fish in a small pond rather than a big fish in a large pond. Okay, so in the next video, we will go into more depth about how the internet is accelerating the collapse of communities so that we can get into talking about actual, concrete, practical solutions for how we can rebuild our communities, both without but also with the internet.